And we're back. Welcome to Print Your Games, the podcast about what's new and awesome in 3D printing for gamers. I'm your host, Jeffrey J. Thacker, also known as Param, and I'm joined by
Kristen Sowards, also known as Seventh Mastery.
Kristen. You know what I hate the most?
Mm, no.
No. Fair answer. I hate going to my printer and then finding where I expected to get cool new dinosaur riding dinosaur. Instead, I have pancake. I hate pancake. Here is
Yes.
one of the people joining us to help keep pancakes from happening. Ty from Tableflip Foundry. Hey, Ty.
Guys, hi. How
Hello.
are you guys?
Good. Happy
I
to have
hope
you on.
I like pancakes, but well, not that kind.
Have you
Those are
had your fair share of resin pancakes, Ty?
oh my goodness. I couldn't even. There is no number I could provide you. I don't even know a number that high. Over the years, just hundreds and hundreds.
So
I actively tell people like this is like don't get frustrated by it at all. There's no reason to be frustrated by this. It's part of it.
So for our listeners' pleasure, those who may not know who you are, could you give us the elevator pitch about who you are and what you do and why you are an expert on pancakes?
Yeah. Okay. So my name's Ty. I own a company called Tableflip Foundry. That sort of started off with just I'm an obsessive hobbyist, and so I started off with one 3D printer, which turned into 10, which turned into 15, which is now like 22, and that was just for hobby only. I didn't like have a business. I had no intention of starting a business, and I really would like find artists that I really liked, and I would make friends with them. So like Velrock Art or Lions Tower, the artists Dan and Keaton have become very good friends of mine, and over time, pre-support started becoming a thing, and I started helping them with that, like as just to help them because they're my friends. And then one day I just had an epiphany about life, and I was like, I want to work for myself. I've got these resources and knowledge. Let's go. And it just sort of started from there. So my company does professional pre-supports. That's as far as how the company makes its money. But aside from that, most people know that we run a community where it's just all about teaching people how to not get pancakes, how to calibrate their printers, how to get them running right, help them troubleshoot. I think it can be a really daunting hobby to get into, and some people may get started, get frustrated, and then quit. And I think that's a really there's so much here, there's so much fun to be had here that I feel like they're missing out, and they got stuck at that first speed bump, which is hard for everybody who's just getting into it. And it's like, well, let's get them way past that speed bump. Let's get them printing. Doesn't have to be perfect, but let's get them going. Let's skip the pancake part. And let's get them printing, and then we can get more people into the hobby. And then the other part is just educating everybody as best I can, with as much knowledge as I have, to try to make it we gotta grow the hobby. The technology will get better if there's more people in it, and the better everybody does it, the faster this will get better.
It's one of the boogeymen out there that keeps getting raised anytime anybody tries to advocate 3D printing. That, oh, you don't have time to get into 3D printing. It's a whole hobby on do it yourself. All your models, they need support, and they're going to all fall apart, and then your printer's going to break.
That is, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that is. When I first started, that was it. I didn't know anything about it. I thought it was the most difficult, technical. Like, you got to know robotics, and you got to learn how to program, and you got to. The goal for everybody, and a lot of people wanted to come in and just plug and play, right? Which we all know it's not exactly like that. Is to get as close to that as possible. Let's speed up the learning curve, and even if you don't want to get super technical, let's get you printing, and then you can learn the technical stuff as you go. But let's get you in love with the hobby soon, with the least amount of detail. Like, we don't have to. You can go down rabbits. It's like 7:30 my time. We could be here until 3:00 in the morning talking about the rabbit holes in 3D printing, right? We don't have to do all that when you're new. Let's get your calibrated. Let's get your resin picked. Let's find some miniatures with some good supports. Get you print some stuff, and then you can pick up things as you go and enjoy it. So I think anybody who's not currently part of the hobby, if you don't know anything about the hobby, it is not as difficult as you might think from the beginning until you start learning about those little rabbit holes you can dive down. But if you don't enjoy that, if you don't enjoy tinkering, you don't have to. Like, a lot of people print and they just don't have that, that desire to tinker and play and mess and look for perfect everything. But it's not as scary. Yeah, I do that actively, but when I first I started flying drones, but only because I wanted to shoot video when I was playing paintball, and I bought a drone, and then I learned that you have to build drones. Like that I couldn't afford a DJI drone, and it wasn't just plug and play, and I had to become a drone builder. I was like, I don't want to do this. It had no interest in that, so I stopped doing drones. I do really like building 3D printers. And
you just brought up some trauma. I just spent the last several months studying to get my drone license.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I did that. Licensing was way different years ago, so I got that taken care of.
Oh yeah, years ago it was like literally go get a pilot license.
That's it. Yeah. So don't be afraid of it. If you're listening and you're not already a hobbyist in this, but you're thinking about it, then stop thinking. It's like time to do it.
Well, it's a lot of thought and a lot of passion. I'm curious how you got started in gaming. Oh, we have a question.
We do.
Yeah. David in chat says, print a perfectly calibrated drone. A ton of drones are 3D printed, David.
Yeah. There's you can build your own from scratch. You can do, I think there's some kits for like less than $100 where you 3D print your frame. And
I'm pretty sure like 20% of Thingiverse is just drone parts.
Heck yeah. I've had to do some for a friend of mine who flies the little FPV drones.
Oh, I love those. I want one so bad.
Okay, what you were saying, how did I get into gaming?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. So some of you guys might know, anybody watching that might know me on any level. I used to be a professional cage fighter. So I used to do MMA. And
okay. It's not our normal intro to this.
No.
Yeah. So
I think the former rocket scientist has now got a challenger for most surprising answer to this question.
So I grew up. I grew up in the country, and I love Ninja Turtles. And because I grew up in the country, I could never do martial arts. But I really wanted to be Donatello. And so I became an adult, and I had money and lived in a place where there were schools. And so I started martial arts, and it just went from there. So I've always been Donatello.
This makes sense because you do machines.
Right. That's me. Like 100%. The day I touched a computer for the first time when I was 8 years old, I put my hands on a keyboard every day since. Every single day, without fail. I'll even go camping, and I still have like a laptop with me.
I still want Donatello to MMA. I kind of see the through line, but I want to hear it.
Okay, so I just started martial arts, and this is just to set up the type of person I am. But I started doing Taekwondo. Became obsessed. I was at the school every day, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week that they were open. I'm an obsessive hobbyist, and so I got my black belt, and I had no interest in pursuing second and third and all of the degrees of black belt. I wanted to pursue more knowledge, so then I started doing judo. And then I fell away from that for a bit. Like, I had black belted, I started teaching, and then I got grown-up jobs and started working at PayPal and like doing these other things. But I sort of lived in this very I'm not a violent person. I just enjoy competition, and I won't get into too much into the fighting part, but I've always been the type of person that's just sort of lived in this aspect of life, like the competitive nature of me, and sports. I played soccer and basketball, fighting, and all that stuff, and at the same time had this interest in computers. And back when I was in high school, it was like dial-up internet, right? You had to use your phone line, and you would go home, you only had one phone line, and if you were using it at night, nobody could use the phone. And so it was very difficult to learn that stuff. But my school had a T1 line, and I had broadband for the first time. And in the library, I had a friend who was like programming something. I was like, what are you doing? He said, I'm making a website. Website, show me. And I was just like obsessed with like the computer and internet and all that stuff. And so simultaneously through like my youth, I was obsessed with graphic design and web design, and also being Donatello. And so through my like travels, I was working for a web design company in Davis, in California, which I think is gone now. I don't even know, Sola Systems or something like that. And one of the guys who was a developer there played. He didn't play D&D, but he played tabletop RPGs. And I've always had sort of both the balance of the geek or nerd in me and the competitor in me. And so
wait, please tell me he played Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness.
he didn't actually.
Okay, because that would have been perfect.
Yeah, the game, and this is really cool, and I don't think I've ever really shared this with very many people, but so he was a player in a game, and he said, hey, at the college every Wednesday or whatever day it was, he's like, we go to the science lab, and there's entire groups of people who play tabletop RPGs. And at the time, I didn't know anybody in Davis. I had just moved there. I was dating a girl there, but I didn't have friends in the area. She just was going to school there. And so this guy was like, hey, you want to be my friend? And I was like, yeah, let's be friends. Like, let's go. And so I went to this for the first time and met his DM.
Mm-hmm.
And his DM is like next level obsessed. He's like me, obsessive hobbyist. Well, he was not a fan of Dungeons and Dragons at the time, which would have been 3.5 then.
Okay.
And so back then licensing was a little different, I guess. I was very new, so my understanding of this is askew, but licensing, so you couldn't use certain terms. You couldn't have a beholder in your game if you were writing your own game, because it was owned by Dungeons or whoever owned it before.
We're both very familiar with that.
So there were some other licensing systems that were open source, and I think they used to be called like a D20 licensing system.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy was writing his own game, and it was called, you can still find the book. I'm almost 40 now, so this was 20 years ago. He was writing this game, and he didn't have it published, and we were his playtesters. And so he knew every rule, he knew every detail to everything, because he was the one that wrote it all. And so the experience working with a person who has that depth of knowledge of the game you're playing was amazing.
Yep.
And because of that, it was like instantly fell in love. I didn't do any role playing at all back then. It was the competitor in me is just all combat, all tactics. I played a cyber ninja, and I can remember every detail to that character from 20 years ago, down to the equipment he had, all of the custom mods he had, all of the cybernetics, the bionics, all of it. I remember every detail to that game to the T. Wow. 20 years later. And he ended up publishing that book. It was called, the system he created was called Universal Decay, and that module was called Dead Stars, and it was all future D20. And that sort of spawned it for me for a very long time. But then, life gets in the way. I moved across the country. I kind of stopped hanging out with those guys, and I forgot about tabletop gaming for maybe 15 years.
Oh, wow.
It was just a thing from my past that I'd forgotten. Then I got a 3D printer, and then I started, I have new friends where I live, and they saw the 3D printer, and they're like, you know what you could make? And I was like, what? I didn't know. I just wanted a 3D printer. Like, you could make some, like, you can make miniatures for like gaming. I was like, gaming, I forgot about gaming. And so it was sort of like that lifestyle I had lived before was sort of like pretty far away from, like, when I was fighting and training, it was fighting men twice a day, and the idea of like tabletop gaming had just become so far from my consciousness that I'd forgotten. And so this is why I bring up the fighting, is just sort of, I lived that life a long time, and then now that I'm retired and I'm done with that life, it's like, what do we do with our time now? We've got to do some other things. And
the answer you chose was staring very closely at the backside of an orc for 8 hours a day.
Yeah, just like doing one of these, or putting supports on it.
Right.
So
one on the big toe.
Yeah. So it just so happens that I have a friend, and he was looking to start a game with all of our friends, and we managed to convince every one of our close group to play D&D. Some of them had never played before. And we talked him into it, and then that was sort of like eye-opening. And even then, I wasn't a role player at all. I was still a tactician. It was all like, where's combat? How far away am I? What skills do I have? And then over time, we all really fell in love with it. I've told other people who aren't tabletop gamers, like, can you imagine a better way to spend a Saturday night than hanging out with a group of your closest friends, telling stories and laughing? Like there's just like, the bar is nothing compared to that. Like I don't go drinking on Saturdays. I go play D&D with my friends. And then Critical Role, I got introduced to Critical Role, and that sort of opened my eyes to the role play, because that's very role play heavy.
Yep.
And I was like, I think I've skipped a part of this where I'm missing out on something big that I should not have been missing out on. And so I made a voice and pretended to be a character, and it's just been absolute love ever since. I still manage to play even though I'm busy. That is one thing that has to take place for me. It's therapy, but that's how I got into gaming, man. I started off as Donatello, met some guys, learned it, forgot it, relearned it, and here we are now. Just like I live every day, kind of like revolving around the game.
I'm glad, because you said 14 hours a day earlier, and you were saying that you're working all the time before we started the show, and like the idea that you were doing that and not getting to game at all just crushed my soul.
No. Saturday nights, I drop everything. I might still have my phone on me and like reply to important messages or something like that, but no, everything goes to the side for 4 hours every Saturday.
Ditto for being glad, because so many of the guests we interview, we ask them, so what do you play these days? And they're like, nothing. I just sculpt and hustle.
Yeah.
It's like, that has to be and I know it can be, because I've been on that side of the fence a couple of times, and it really sucks working really close into a hobby or industry you love as your day job, and then not getting to actually enjoy it, and just hearing about how much everybody else is enjoying the stuff you make.
Just out of reach. If I could just start a game.
Yeah. One last question I have to ask. What are you playing in your current D&D game?
Like what character?
Yeah.
So we have 2 D&D games.
Oh, 2?
Nice. Yeah. So my DM and his brother-in-law both DM.
Okay.
They're both DMs. But my main character is a character called Dust, and I started. So our group has been, which I know a lot of people have a hard time finding, unbelievably reliable. They show up for the game consistently.
The best.
There are times where we have like a gap, like October's busy for all of us, but we're playing on Friday because Saturday's busy for everybody. So
nice.
We're going
on
on 4 years, so it's like blessing. But 4 years ago they didn't have Leonin. All they have were Tabaxi. So the character's name is Dust on the Road, and he is a Tabaxi that I just sort of like added flair to make him a lion.
Nice.
And he is a barbarian, and this is weird. He was an Eagle Totem barbarian, and through circumstances of our game has been he made a contract with a devil.
Okay.
This is always a great decision.
Yeah. And the contract for the devil was to he is falling in love with another character, like slowly. 4 years he's been falling in love, and they still haven't realized it yet, but he essentially is through his backstory, he has lost a lot of people, and he sort of seeks to like not have that happen ever again, like to any degree. No friends are going to die while they're on his watch. Well, the one he's sort of like slowly falling in love with, she did die once in front of him. And through divine intervention was saved.
Okay.
But to him, the role play part of him, right, in character, he watched her die, and just like everybody else. So the contract is for him to be strong enough to protect everybody in his party, and to change. It's like I don't know how to word this.
Mhm.
If she is ever to perish, it will be him who dies instead.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
So does that change up your mechanics, or?
So what happened was my DM said, "All right, you were very broad with become strong enough to protect everybody," and
Mhm.
he shifted the barbarian from a totemic barbarian to a wild magic
Oh,
barbarian,
cool. Very cool.
which was just appropriate for our game without
Mhm.
getting into.
I have a sneaky purpose here, because then I'm like, did you convince any mini sculptors to make your character?
I did, in fact. Yeah.
Ah,
The
I knew it.
secret bonus of this hobby.
Yeah. So two different artists actually, Keaton and Dan, Lions Tower and Valrock Art.
Oh, I know this
Specifically,
many.
they specifically did Leonin sets, and Keaton specifically did a character just for me, and then Dan modified one of his Leonin characters to match like the aesthetics of mine, and then recently I got another one. Like I have maybe some that I've kit bashed myself,
Uh-huh.
and then some that an artist has taken the time to go out of their way. All right, yeah. So you know the set.
Okay, which one is it?
Okay. You know what? I will. I can do the same here. I can.
You probably actually can't.
Well, I can't switch your screen, but I can switch my screen.
Yeah, that's true. You could probably make
Yeah,
your
because
one
I
there
had the way I
magic.
have it set up is. Let me show you.
Mhm.
This is going to be through 3D Builder here. So this
Okay.
this is dust.
Nice.
I know this is like the rendering in 3D Builder is amazing. So this is the one by Velrock Art.
Very cool.
Mhm.
I feel like if I go try to find the one from Lions Tower, which is kind of buried, I might take up too much time here. So I don't think
No,
I'll be
that's
able
fair. That's
yeah,
fair.
to grab it right this
Right.
minute. But
Very cool.
so those two guys have gone out of their way to make sure I have a my mini.
For our audio listeners, it's this really awesome lion barbarian in a kilt with a big, ginormous F-off battle axe in one hand. It's nice. It's lovely.
It's about as
lovely.
barbarian as it gets.
Yeah. And that was from Velrock. Is
That
that
one-
available on their site if they wanted to buy one?
I don't believe he sells that many. I think he put it up on Thingiverse.
Oh,
That's
cool.
cool. So people go grab it
Love
for free.
freebies.
Yeah, this was
Yeah.
done before he was running a business, and so it was just something nice he did because that dude's great. So it's really cool. And then the set that you had just presented, I think the leader of that set, Dan, had gone in, and I think he knew I had like belts and certain gauntlets and stuff like that, so he modified one of those characters with that axe for me. So I want to show it, and I feel bad that I can't, but I don't want to. It'll take me 5 minutes to try to find it, and we got better things to do.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
So let's get on topic with supports. And we've explained supports a few times on the podcast before, but you're an expert at supports.
Yeah,
So,
I hope so.
So if in a succinct manner, could
Yeah.
you please answer why supports? Why do we even need to have these weird tower-looking scaffoldings hanging off our minis?
All right, so that's hard to describe. If you are unfamiliar with 3D printing, trying to describe this can be hard. But the long and short of it is physics are not our friend in 3D printing, and
Mhm.
because of that, when we try to print things that are floating in a particular way in 3D space, they won't float. And so in order for them to print properly, they have to be in some way grounded, right? Which is you connecting the floating bit to the build plate, which is then connected to the printer, which is then grounded to the world in some way. And so we can sort of like circumvent not being able to just float objects in 3D space by connecting them with this sort of like, physical architecture. It's about the best way I could probably put it.
So a good way to visualize this is if you have a character who is standing up, it's not just enough usually to just make sure that the feet touch the build plate, because maybe an elbow is hanging down, or they're holding something, and there's arms hanging down, or their chin's at a weird angle. Anything that stops pointing up or at the acceptable slope, but suddenly starts pointing back down at the build plate, needs to be secured in some manner. It is an island, which is what we call those the points on the model that at that particular z-axis point is not connected to anything else. It's just floating in midair, and nothing else would hold it up or allow it to print.
Yep, that's the best description without some visual aid or like a long.
Well, we're a podcast, so
Yeah.
we gotta do it.
That's
with
about the
voice.
easiest way we can put it into words. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So what do you do? You just find all the islands and then slap a piece of plastic on it, or
That's it. Let's go. No. So when people enter the hobby, they start to understand the purpose and need for supports. What takes a long time to understand is the depth at which they can be done, and the importance of understanding and doing them well. And a lot of that has to do with, some of it's just holding up a portion of a model that's hanging out there in space. But the other part of it is understanding things like suction forces and pull forces and speeds and sizes and contact damage. And I'm starting to learn more and more as we go that different resins have different properties, like physical properties. So there are some resins that are harder and stronger. There are some resins that are more flexible and softer. So when you start to get into supports, if you're only doing the supports for yourself, you're likely to sort of like settle into what works best for you. But to support any given model, even for somebody like myself, can take half an hour to an hour, sometimes more, to do one model. And not everybody wants to spend that time, learning a technical skill, struggling with it, failing at it, having to redo it, print again, losing material. Like, it's a process. And so
it's valuable game time.
That's right. We could be doing something. We could be painting. And so companies like mine will sort of try to account for those things beforehand. So an artist will create a nice miniature. They'll create a Leonin barbarian. And in order to save you from having to learn all of those technical details right away, or save you a ton of time, they'll hire a company like mine who will do the pre-supports on the model once now. And so that hundreds of people can then not have to do it later. So we can save you a ton of time. And in that process, they can hire somebody who has dedicated supreme amounts of time to understanding the wheres, whens, whys, hows of like placing a support, what size support, when to do it this way, when to use that technique, so that the end result is better than something you would likely put together yourself without a huge amount of study or practice. So that's kind of what our business does, and why we do it is just save artist time and save hobbyist time. And then hopefully we do a better job than you would deign to do on your own without spending the time to learn. So,
and even then, it's like I like to support my models, and I know my printer very well. I happen to know like my Saturn's got a quirk with this part of the build plate and all this stuff. And so I know what to support for my printer. And like, it's like, ain't no way on earth that bow's going to print without a medium. I know the things like that.
Right.
But I'm one of thousands of potential customers with different permutations. It has to be really hard to make supports for these models that will work on Saturns and Anycubics and this weird off-brand Chinese thing. And
yeah, you are absolutely right. So oftentimes, I'll speak with people through Facebook, through Reddit, through Discord, any, whatever platform we happen to be having the discussion. And I used to also be like this. And the part of it is there is a sort of surface level understanding of how it works and why. But what a lot of people who are learning the hobby or getting into the hobby, or not really obsessive like I am, or maybe you are, is that they don't know what they don't know. And so there are so many things to consider. And so what will happen is somebody will try to print a pre-supported model, whether it's, me or another company or an artist who did it or whatever, and it'll fail. And they assume that the the pre-supports are bad, or they assume their printer is not set up right, or they assume some other thing, right? When it could be a combination of all three. It could be just the supports. It could be just the tune. So understanding those things is usually sort of like a deeper thing, and that's what my team and I focus on mostly. So when we have to evaluate how do we support something for the broadest amount of people to print successfully, that's a really loaded thing. So I was thinking about this earlier today because I figured this would be something we talk about, and it was like, how do you? I'm gonna tell you an embarrassing story about me, and then I'll leave that in. So, and I've told this story before, but a couple of years ago, I was new. It was 2019, maybe. I was somewhat new. Resin printing was just sort of just coming out. It was the Mars and the Photon, and that was it. And the YouTube videos back then were how to sand your model, how to sand the support marks off your model, right? Mm-hmm. Nowadays, if you have to break out a file and sand, somebody messed up, right? Like somebody messed up their support somewhere along the way. And I'll go even as far as to say, if you have to get hot water and heat up your model in order to remove your support, somebody has missed the mark somewhere, whether it be you or your pre-support artist. I have not used heat to remove supports from any models in the better part of a year or two. So I have high standards, of course. But I would go as far as to say that. But there are many things that we didn't know back then that we do know now. But that knowledge from back then is sort of like a new person joining the hobby. That's the level of knowledge they are likely to have. So there are variables that we can't consider for everybody. And so everybody coming in and being like, well, it's just, you just have to turn your exposure up. It's like, the failure may not be that. It could be like, here's a list of things I was thinking, like what could cause failure. It could be the condition of your FEP. It could be how tight your FEP is stretched. It could be how thick your FEP is. It could be your build plate is not flat. It could be your build plate is not level. It could be that your resin is old. It could be that your resin is not properly mixed. It could be that your exposure settings are low. It could be that your lift settings are too high. It could be, like the amount of variables are wide. Very.
Okay. Trying to just troubleshoot all that gives me anxiety just even thinking about it, let alone like making my career. I can't even.
So what I've done is I looked at some of the problems that I was seeing in the community, where people were struggling to find a common answer is probably the best way to say it. So like calibration, we're going to get into calibration, but calibration is one of those things that is sort of a unknown to a lot of people. So what will happen is they'll print a detailed calibration part, and there are plenties out there. The one I used to use the most was the Amerilabs Town, and they would print it, and then Amerilabs does have documentation on it, but man, you got to read a book of like text, a wall of text, just to decrypt what they're saying. And sometimes no different than trying to explain with words what supports are for and why they're needed. They're trying to explain with words like what to look for in a visual thing. Right. And then you'll still find them everywhere, but you'll find pictures on Reddit. You'll find pictures on Facebook. You'll find people posting and asking like, hey, how does this look? Right. And one guy jumps in and he says, you look overexposed, look at this area. And another guy will jump in and be like, no, you're underexposed, look at this area. And then 5 people will say, you look fine. And then 4 people will say, turn up your exposure. And so there was no standard, right? And so I was looking at this going, how are we supposed to account for all of these people's opinions about the outcome of a calibration test? And it just became very clear to me. My opinion, of course, is that a calibration test that you print and don't know if you're calibrated when it's over is not a good calibration, right? Like you've not done anything besides confuse yourself. And so when I started thinking about that, I'm the type of person who likes to break everything down to its root, right? It's like the little kid who keeps asking why. Like, well, Why do we need supports? Well, we have to hold up the model. Why do we have to hold up the model? Well, because it has to be this way. Why? Why does it have to be that way? And so if you keep asking why long enough, you're going to get down to the very root of it. So I tried to break down. I do miniatures mostly, so a lot of my work is based around a miniature. But I tried to break down, like, okay, what's the be all end all of printing something successfully? And then it occurs to me, like, of course, the supports. You can't print anything unless it's supported most of the time, right? I was like, okay, we need to break it all the way down to the supports. How can we make a thing that tells you yes or no? It will work, it will not work. And so it occurred to me that, like, well, what is a pancake? A pancake is a very clear no. And what is a successful print, right? A very clear yes. So how can we use that very clear yes or no to help everybody stop having opinions about whether it's right? And so that's where the Cones of Calibration came from. There it is. Look at it. So the Cones of Calibration were designed, and my understanding of what I was doing then has changed. I've learned a lot since I concepted the idea. But the idea was very clear, yes or no, right? With the idea in mind that the cones would be tuned to work with the widest range of pre-supported models at the time.
Right.
So, you know,
for our podcast listeners, I'm throwing up a picture of the Cones of Calibration, and it is what looks like an I-beam that's been lined on two sides with two cones that are pointing at each other, one on the top, one on the bottom, with a very thin pillar that connects the two cones. One side's labeled success, and the other side is labeled failure.
They resemble like an hourglass a lot, with that little teeny connection in the middle. And so the idea initially was okay, we need to know what size supports hold up what size detail. And that sort of spawned into, okay, no, we don't need to know that. We just need to make it fail when we want, make it succeed when we want. And that was the root of it. It was, okay, if I turn my exposure up, I predict that more of these cones are going to print. So then we run it through the printer and the prediction is right. And that's the root of where the cones started was, can we predict a result? If we can predict a result, then we can force the outcome with our predictions. And so the cones, each cone has a different size contact. Each cone has a different size contact. And those contacts are very precisely tuned to work with the widest. Actually, at this point, my understanding, at the time, it was the widest range of supports. Now my understanding has changed, and it's gotten very technical, and I've learned a lot more about resin and tensile strength and all of that. But what we have, I have a small team helping me work on this. Lots of testing, and I've got a couple of other people who are like-minded like I am. They have sort of like an engineering mind, and so what we have determined, and still finding the right words for it, is that the Cones of Calibration are not the be-all, end-all of tuning your printer. Okay, they are not meant for that, and they won't work for that purpose. What I wanted was to give new users a jump start to enjoying the hobby, right? And so this was a really decent way to get yourself tuned to have good results. Not perfect results, not the best in the world. In some cases they are. Depends on your resin. But it was just a way to sort of like get people a yes or no, remove the opinions, like let's get them printing, let's get them enjoying this hobby, and they can learn some of those finer. They can go print the Amerilab City after that and tune from there. But let's go from here.
Let's before we get too down the weeds, let's talk about what a success and a failure look like on the cones.
Sure.
So the way it's designed is there's a success side where the goal is that all of these cones print. But what separates your test from a lot of tests is there's actually a fail side on the other side where you want those cones to not print successfully. You want pancakes there, which is worrying for anybody who's doing any resin printing. It's like, why do I intentionally want to have a print failure? But the idea is that it's real easy if you just keep cranking the exposure on your printer. Eventually, any mini will print.
Mhm.
I mean, it's going to look like a giant blob with no
Right.
details at that point, but it'll print. So this is to set a very particular range of exposure.
That's the idea. Is to clarify for anybody who maybe doesn't know this, the higher your exposure is, the we're going to start talking about dimensional accuracy because this is really important. So if you have a dimensionally accurate part, meaning a part that is exactly the size that it was intended to be, so let's say a cube that's 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters exactly. If you are to overexpose that cube will get larger. Now, it will get larger to some subtle degree. It might be 1/100th of a millimeter larger or 1/10th of a millimeter larger, but we start to fall out of dimensional accuracy. That largeness translates to the support tips. So if I have a 0.28 support tip, which is my standard medium, and I then overexpose that tip, it stops being a 0.28 and it starts being a 0.32. And all of a sudden, my support has become stronger, and I need to know that it has become stronger, and this is how we can test it. And so the idea behind the cones is knowing that logic. If I overexpose, my supports become stronger. If I underexpose, my supports become weaker. We now have a side where the success side is designed to test for underexposure, and the fail side is designed to test for overexposure. And in between the two sides lies what I would refer to as the most printable exposure. Not perfect, but the most printable. So if you can predict a failure and you can predict a success, then we can put you in a place in between the two. Now, the thing that we have learned about that particular function is that depending on your resin, you will have the same structural results, but you will not have the same dimensional accuracy. And this is a part of resin printing that is just coming to the forefront of like community knowledge. And it's really, really important that everybody understands it. So you have what I'm referring to now as two different types of calibration. One type of calibration specifically talks about dimensional accuracy. I would say that if we were being fair, dimensional accuracy is the only way you can get perfect exposure, right? It is a 10 millimeter cube. You print it. It is a printed 10 millimeter cube. That is the perfect exposure. The problem is if you, let's say, I'm going to use some extreme examples. Let's say you use Z-Mud. Z-Mud is called Z-Mud for a reason. And it also doesn't cost very much money, right? So you get what you pay for with that product. You can print Z-Mud at perfect dimensional accuracy. But at that accuracy, the resin is so weak that it can't hold itself up with normal pre-supports, right? So if we were to calibrate with dimensional accuracy with a low strength resin, we would not be able to print pre-supported models because the resin doesn't have the attributes capable of printing pre-supported models. That doesn't mean you can't use perfect dimensional accuracy with low strength resin, but what that does mean is you are going to have to support your own models with those attributes in mind.
Like at a certain point, this sounds maddening, and where you can't and I'm going to use the phrase support not to mean the supports and the models, but to provide the supported services.
Right.
Like, what's the answer? We just have a list of we know these resins aren't crap. Use them. If you're using Z-Mud, sorry, can't help you.
I would love to say, okay, so there's two answers to that. And that is something I've definitely thought a lot about. One answer, yeah, we have recommended resins. The problem is like, I don't want to, there are resins out there I've never tried. And I don't want to push people away from companies that might provide a really good product because I prefer a specific one. So publicly just being like, yeah, this is it. You just get this and you're going to be happy. We can do that, and if you're on our server long enough, you're going to find out the couple of resins that people like go to.
Yeah, it seems the community has rallied around a few favorites.
There's a couple, yeah. But there's some other ones out there that are quite good. They're a little less expensive. But I don't want to push the community in a certain way as if I'm sponsored by a certain company recommending their product.
Right.
The other part of that is, while dimensional accuracy is one way of calibrating, we can actually take, you can actually take the cones of calibration and print those with ZMUD. Now, the results are going to provide you a mechanical, what I would call a printability exposure, but a mechanical exposure test. So we're calibrating mechanically to the point where ZMUD is capable of holding up the model on those supports. But in doing so, it requires that resin, like we stated earlier, the resin must be overexposed in order to be thicker, in order to be strong enough to do what it needs to do. So what you'll end up with after the cones with a resin like ZMUD is you'll get a fully printable pre-supported model, but you're going to lose a lot of detail because you had to compensate for the weakness with overexposure. But that doesn't mean you can't do it, and sometimes that's acceptable.
Right.
So what the cones do is they give you a printable exposure, a reliably printable exposure. If you can get the cones to print, you can print just about anything. There's a lot involved. I don't want to say anything, but most good pre-supports will work
with that resin at that
with that resin at that exposure. That doesn't mean the outcome is going to be perfect, because you might have to overexpose to get there.
Right.
But it does mean that you will get something. If you bought ZMUD, you bought 5 liters of ZMUD, well, you're going to want to get rid of it, and we got to get rid of it somehow. So at the very least, you can use your resin. You can do stuff. And then
more zombies.
Right, more zombies. But then
Earth elementals will work.
Gelatinous cube does not need any detail. You can print as many gelatinous cubes with ZMUD as you want. But
have you run into the opposite, like a resin that's so strong that it just needs a gnat whisker to hold it up?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple out there. I haven't personally played with it, but the Amerilad's AMG 7 is supposed to be high detail, high strength. And so here, what we're doing, there's others. I think Soraya Navy Gray has the capability of doing that, and also Frozen Aqua 4K, which is what I'm using, probably the 8K2. And I hear little whispers about second generation resins coming from like Elegoo that might be capable of that. So here's what we're discussing in the background, like behind the curtain, is how do we develop a process where through this process, using the cones, and we've got another calibration part coming out soon. By using both of these calibration parts, how do we get the best results for any resin at any time? Sometimes it's just the cones. Sometimes it's the cones and the new tool. And the new tool is meant specifically for dimensional accuracy. But I'm working with a guy. If you're on our server, it's J3D Tech, and he had some really clever ideas about dimensional accuracy tests that are yes or no. Whereas the tests we are familiar with are like, okay, take your calipers, measure, make sure it's
first
right?
Buy calipers. It's not a common household item.
Yeah.
True.
And so his tool that he's been developing, we've been talking about how can we provide the best. Right. Yeah. We should have. I mean, those of us really in the hobby should have calipers, but at the same time, if you're not, it's like, that's a terrible test. You're just eyeballing stuff. Well, his is designed in a similar way as mine, where it is a binary yes or no. It fits or it doesn't fit. It prints or it doesn't print. And so he and I have sort of partnered up, and we've gone back and forth over our two tools, refining, discussion. What's the method? How are we going to present this to the community to make it really easy and understandable? So there are, let's say, for example, is a scenario where I have a high strength resin. Let's say Soraya Navy Gray is one that I can say is pretty close to that, if not that. But where you're printing the cones and you're printing them the way they're meant to be printed, but then you go and measure with calipers and you're actually negative on the dimensional accuracy. By going negative, and then here's the funny thing about dimensional accuracy if you go any direction outside of perfect, you lose detail, right? We tend to want to skew as much towards underexposure as we can rather than overexposure, because the lack of detail is more apparent with overexposure. But we can have a resin print the cones perfectly, and in doing so, force the resin underexposed. And that's the opposite of what we want too. If we come across those resins, we then use the second tool where we force the exposure to perfect dimensional accuracy. And after that process, we go from the cones into dimensional accuracy. We know that it doesn't matter what we print at that point. It's going to have dimensional accuracy is the perfect detail. There is no way to get better detail than to have a model come out exactly as designed. And so you can take those higher quality resins or the harder resins and put them into dimensional accuracy while still adhering to the mechanical necessity of the cones, and everything you print that is well supported will print perfectly for you from then on. It's the dream. So we're trying to develop this process to speed that up, get the understanding there. And even if you don't understand how it works technically, doesn't matter. Do A, do B, profit. That's the idea in the future.
Nice.
So we do have version 2 of cones coming out soon, real soon, really, really soon. So the way we're in what I would think as of this morning, I've been talking with J3D Tech, and we are in agreement that we are probably in the last revision of version 2 of the cones right now. We just need to verify. We have a whole test print team. We need to verify that our results are consistent, that we're happy with them, and we're comfortable with the public being happy with them too. It's not perfect. This is it's not a magical tool. It won't work perfectly for everyone every time, which is just how 3D printing works in general. But they are really, really good, and it's going to provide the most people with that. So once that finishes, the idea is that they will be put into an open closed beta. The open closed beta will only be available to the users on our Discord server. So we're going to open it up. We have 1,700 users. Probably 500 of those users might use it, but that'll be a wider data set for us before we go public. So anybody who wants to see, I learned my lesson the hard way on the first cone. And so anybody who wants to get a kind of a sneak peek, we're probably looking at that in the next week, maybe 2 weeks, where we're going to be opening that up to our community specifically to test and try. We've made huge improvements to the cones in general. One concern was wear on the FEP. Printing the same thing over and over in the exact same location on the FEP will cause unnecessary wear. So we've softened some things up so that the pull off the FEP is less, I'm going to use the term sharp. It'll be less sharp of a pull. We have made it more clearly defined. We've isolated each cone so that the cone next to it and its pull on the FEP doesn't disrupt the cone next to it. It also means the outside cones have even pull on the FEP from the inside cones. So there's some revisions there, but the number one, hands down, best revision we've made is it prints 35% faster. So it used to, on average would take you an hour 20 minutes. It's 35% faster. So pretty much under an hour for everybody at this point, which is, we have discussed there is no way to make it print faster at this point. It's just not possible. We have just refined it all the way down. So I am extraordinarily excited to release that, and with any luck, we've solved some of the stability issues that some people might have as far as getting abnormal results. We're hoping to cut that percentage way back, and then in that process, we're probably going to be releasing the secondary tool, and then coming up with a whole process of helping everybody figure out exactly what they need to do and when they need to do it. And so that'll be coming soon. That's kind of our contribution, my company, my personal contribution to the community is, let's get everybody printing better, having more fun, producing the things they want to print, so they can just have a good time. I don't know if you guys. I'm sure you guys have this experience. Have you ever gotten a new something and you're really excited about it, and then it doesn't work?
Oh, you mean like my Neptune
yes.
3?
Yeah, anything, right?
Yeah.
But specifically from
Yeah.
last episode.
Yeah, you go buy a new PS5 and it's a defective one, and you get home and you're so excited and you realize it's not working. Like that's the worst experience. So
Yeah.
you make the plunge, you buy your 3D printer, you're excited, let's go. You print the default thing that comes from whatever company, and it's the ring or the chess piece, and it prints perfect, and you're like, let's go, and then nothing works. Man, that's not just disappointment. That's like extra disappointment because you were so excited. We're trying to fix that. We don't want that for people.
Well, speaking of excitement, we are running out of time, but I did not want to let you get out of here without telling me how you're going to destroy several gigabytes of my hard drive.
Okay. We have just recently reached, 16 gigabytes, I think. We have just recently reached 1,000 members on our Discord server, which was a huge milestone for Tableflip Foundry's Discord. And I got together with a number, I think it's 23 artists, and these artists decided to do a huge free giveaway. So it is 3D printable content. There's even some there's a painting tutorial in there. There's some 5e module content. I think it's like a dinosaur module with some stat blocks and stuff like that from Critical Crafting. But there is a giant amount of content, and it is 16 gigabytes worth of free miniatures. There's a lightsaber handle in there. There's some wargaming stuff. There's some RPG stuff. The only way to get that is to join our Discord. You can join our Discord through our website, which is tableflipfoundry.com. You can go on YouTube and find my video explaining all of that stuff. Just look up Tableflip Foundry on YouTube. But you have to join our Discord server, accept our rules. You have to, when you set it up, you're going to pick what content you want to see. So if you like 3D printing content, make sure you select that content. And then our giveaway is going to be available in the channels there. And then you can kind of go through that process. And it's all totally free. And since I get to talk about it for a minute, I have a new announcement that I haven't made to anybody. So this will be the first place to do it. We are going to be doing sort of like a grand finale. So the files are available. Today's the 20th. I think the files are available until the 25th, which is Sunday. And then they will no longer be available to the public after that. You'll have to go to the artist if you want those files. On the 26th, we are going to have a discount giveaway. So we're going to have a ton of discount codes to all of the artists in the giveaway. So if you really like the stuff they made and you want to buy some of their other stuff, we're going to be giving you from like 30 to 60% off on any one of their stores for the artists that participate in that. So we're going to try to we want to give you a little bit of their content for free, but if you love it and you want more of it, I want to save you some money too. And that's just sort of, that's a thank you from them and a special thank you from me. Just, we have one of the best communities out there. They're supremely helpful. Everybody gets helped to some degree. So I couldn't feel more blessed to have like such a crazy, awesome group of people to hang out with every day. And this is how everybody's like, gets to be rewarded for their awesomeness. So yeah,
Cool.
And I will vouch that Tableflip Foundry's Discord channel is a great place to hang out for 3D printing nerds. It is one of my favorite places to go post when I print something new, because I know I will always get some feedback on it. And
we
then,
all
like,
want to feel great
four
about
people asking what the STL was.
That's it. That's it. We all want to, like, I love when I make something really cool. I want people to tell me how cool it is. It's like, that's a place to go. Like, and if nobody else does, I'm going to tell you. If I see you posted something that you're really proud of, you're going to be sure that, like, I'm going to jump in and sorry, there's a fly. I'm going to jump in and tell you how great I think it is. And that's part of all of this, is all the cool stuff we make. We want to show it off and share it. And that's a place to do it.
All right. Well, we are out of time. If you want to follow more of Ty and Tableflip Foundry, go to their website. We will have that linked into the show notes, so you'll be able to get to it there. And is there anything else you want to shout out to before we bounce out of here?
No, I think I probably talked
Cool.
enough for an hour.
Awesome. If you want to
Great.
follow more of our programs, you can do so over at printyourgames.com, where you'll find all of our episodes and links to our socials and stuff, including twitter.com/printyourgames, facebook.com/printyourgames, youtube.com/param, as well as our links to Spotify, iTunes, and all the places you can listen to this episode. If you want to help the show out, you can do so by giving us a review on any of those services, or a comment or thumbs up, or on the video services. So on YouTube, a comment and a thumbs up, subscribing to us there really helps spread the word. And on the other platforms, giving us a review is really the best way to get the show into more ears. Until next time, I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
Kristen Sowards, also known as Seventh Mastery. Don't forget to use your screen protector.
And our guest has been Ty from Tableflip Foundry, and we will see you all next time.